Good morning to you, my friends, wherever you may be in the world today. Alan Clements here, Los Angeles, California, United States of America. Sunday, April 11, 2021. Today's talk, the 11th in this new series based on my just released new book, Extinction, X-rated. It's an auto-fictional, uber dark, comedic, gallows humor-oriented satire on good and evil. Today's talk is the dilemma, the spiritual, psychological, emotional, existential dilemma of violence and of suffering. Now, this is obviously not new. This is the essential theme of religion, philosophy, psychology. I would venture to say the study of the cosmos, for those who have a sensitivity, it's the dilemma of being born, whatever that means, to exist through the eternal womb of the feminine. All of us come through the womb. Born into a context. Again, I fear stating the obvious, but allow me in this existential, improvisational sharing from my heart to yours. We're born into a context not of our own making, not of anyone's own making. Yes, there may be laws that refer back to karma, action, result of action, context, nature, but we are merely microscopic specks in a spectrum of infinity times infinite imagination. We do not know who we are, to state the obvious. We do not know where we're going. Yes, there's religion, there's philosophies, there's Dhamma, Dharma, there's Buddhism, there's Sanskrit, there's Pali, there's Hinduism, there's atheism, there is all forms of scientific isms, totalitarianism. There's so many ideologies, so many truths, so many fictions, but in it, the dilemma of violence is the one that really continually sends an ever more poignant and pointed, if you will, shiver, like psychic or existential glass moving through my veins. The more I feel, the more I sensitize, the more I feel that I awaken. Quite contrary to happiness and peace and stability and calm, I feel like I am in a, maybe you feel this way too, in an incessant, fractured, eternal silo of hell within it. Yes, 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 there are moments of joy, of bliss, of love. But by and large, when you open up the spectrum of observation inside and outside through the filters of relaxing denial, prejudice, blame, and one feels authentically and sees context, it's hard to escape the dilemma of violence and of suffering. I think this is why a lot of people, most of us, have turned towards the numismatic, the spiritual, the psychological, the existential, the holy, the reverential. We want to believe in something bigger, larger, more radiant, virtuous than darkness and satanic behaviors that we see all over the world, especially today in Africa, especially today in Myanmar. And it's not new. Dozens and hundreds of dozens of genocides and massacres, all justified in the name of something. Here in my own state, California, you can check on the exact dates. the genocide of California, 1849 to 1870 or up to 1900. I think the indigenous American Indian population here in California was something like 150,000 people. And state-sanctioned militias, with the approval of state representatives, systematically went about killing, raping, persecuting, starving to death the local population, the indigenous people of this blessed California. The colonization, the genocide of human life, of nature. And it eradicated the local population from 150,000 to something like in 1900 to 17,000 indigenous people who had names, families, toys and joys, loves and romances, eroticisms, psychological wonderment. They looked at the plants, the animals, the trees, the bears, the cougars, the squirrels, the branches, the moon, the stars. They wondered, they pondered. They were life. And they were massacred in the name of colonization. And this goes on ad infinitum. And it points to me why I personally studied a religion, or call it a trans-religion, call it Buddhism or Dhamma as I would prefer to call it, a post-Buddhistic understanding for me of a teaching, a philosophy, a way of engaging existence, a way of engaging your own birth by prioritizing the dilemma of suffering and violence. And I was taken deep into my own heart by, if you do this, young man, you will find these results. And we are here to guide you, support you, provide food and shelter and clothing for you as a monastic. And all that we ask of you to do is follow the code of discipline as a monk, to abide as best as you can in the teaching of the actual practice of seeing for yourself how you can, this is a real deep point for me, how you can minimize, and if you are diligent, and if you are skilled, you are quick at the existential source of your own being, you're on fire, it's possible to achieve what I learned and what I've referred to many times in one of my favorite discourses attributed to the Buddha, the Tuvatakasuta. I think Tuva, T-U-V-A, I think it means quick, rapid, lightning bolt, luminosity. And it's a teaching that was meant for the Deva mind, not just Devas as angelic beings, but the mind that is radiant with the intuitive kind of pre-rapture, if you will, of immediacy, presence, heightened granularity of heart, deep pixelation. It's that type of impulsion, if you will, of this sense of a physical, emotional, existential orgasm that isn't actually about a completion of that energy, a Dhamma wave of high immediacy, tuva, radiant, quick, fertile, receptive, call it a heightened samvega, a heightened urgency, an unrestrained desire to quench, to satisfy. And if you do this, young man, and your mind is quick like that of a deva, you can achieve a high degree of relaxation from what I learned as self-generated violence. There's obvious forms of violence, there's physical violence, there's emotional violence, there's spiritual violence, there's psychological violence. Deception is violence, betrayal is violence. I don't want to get too dramatic about that. And then, of course, the more overt forms of globally agreed upon, cosmologically agreed upon violence. The persecution of an innocent human being is violence. The unspeakable horror of forced abuse upon a man or a woman, rape, is violence. Torture is extreme violence. Terrorism is unremitting violence. The idea of watching or witnessing the loss of life, as we're seeing in Burma, a woman, a man, a husband, a grandfather, a nun, a monk, a country, citizens of the world watching the videos, but up close watching the torture, the persecution, the ongoing hunting throughout Burmese society of people who are critical of those who commit violence. This dilemma of violence, and it's so easy for me to go right into my deep Nekama-based renunciate, deep trans-Buddhistic bhikkhu, or if you're a woman, a bhikkhuni, someone who is dedicated to retrieving their deva radiance of love, of kindness, of goodness, and equally peeling back their collusion with these primordial forces, if you will, of greed, anger, and delusion, the forces that, when unseen in one's own inner being, become the ground of violence. How many times I would hear from my teachers in Burma, the late Venerable Mahasi Sayadaw, Sayadaw U Zawana, Sayadaw U Sujata, Sayadaw U Pandita, Sayadaw U Janaka, nuns, monks, laymen, laywomen, a culture of Dhamma, but they would, only if you could see, Agasara, that the entire dilemma of violence in the world, cognitive generated, psychological, emotional, nama, mind-oriented violence, comes from within the human mind, comes within consciousness. Those who know that, those who see that, those who do all that they can in their own humble way in the gift of their human life, the preciousness of the human life, how often I would hear that, those who take up the Dhamma fight, to fight self-generated violence and the dukkha, or the suffering that's generated from that form of violence. And look at all the ways in which violence is, you take a gun and you want to shoot the person with the gun. Yes, there's an immediate relief, a kind of revenge-based perverse rapture, if you will. I've never killed. I've been around murder. I've been around homicide. I've been around all these forms. I've seen war up close, not for long, a few months at a time. I've been in the vicinity of it in the Yugoslavia, but never at the front lines. Always behind, safeguarded by troops, willing to sacrifice their lives for our own freedom and safety. But you know it, we all live on a planet of violence, a perpetual wave, tsunami after tsunami. And yes, the dilemma of violence, taking up the good fight. But if you don't take up the good fight and really, to embrace, to engage how you understand the role and the meaning of Dhamma or Dharma in your own heart, your own psychology, how deeply you're willing to go into the Deva radiance of your own deep ecosystem of inner beingness and infiltrate everything that you know of as in your own mind, taking radical responsibility, mindfully seeing collusion, complicity, blame, and judgment, and that impulse, all of a sudden, oh, it's my daughter that you just raped. I am going to slit your throat. I'm going to put poison in your water. I'm going to contaminate your food supply. All of which is going to be done in Burma today because it's a country that is out of control by a terrorist organization, and the people have bonded in a federation of freedom fighters, and they want to fight the good fight to rid their country of dictatorship, which means to rid their country of violence. And yes, that's one form of ridding a country of violence. And my heart screams, my eyes cry to think of what is in store in the country of Myanmar. All that money going into the military that is a kind of toxic collusion with giving those men and those women in the armaments, the airplanes, the tanks, the jets, the missiles, the drones, the rape, the torture, all of them getting that toxic sense of I'm not alone in my evil. Russia and China, the Ukraine and Turkey, and all those intermediaries who are feeding me the gun, the weapon, the money. And it's like, God, where do you fight this devil of violence and suffering? And how many of us, I know you, how many of us have just said, you can't fight violence with violence. But isn't that civilization? Isn't that democracy? Isn't that what a noble army is? And so to really tease out from within the fabric of the psychological, the numismatic, the existential, the Dhammic, and then there's the cultural, societal, and political. All these intersecting ecosystems of life, always back to the central question. Who protects us from violence? Who supports us in overcoming our own complicity with violence? You know, thank you for allowing me just here to extemporaneous riff on this deep philosophical issue of violence and suffering. But I spent 7 months in this room, 8 months really, writing a book that for me, I left this city 47 years ago to become a monk. And here I am sitting yet again in the same city, a few miles away from where I live, just here down the street in Venice. Now I'm in Santa Monica, to understand my role with violence, how to overcome this deep proclivity. And my mind cries when I think of the debacle of the people of Burma today and what they're faced with. In writing this book, I kept asking, is there a way, if you're a world leader, and you have every resource available to you, Alan, you have the purest psychedelic substances in the world, in any quantity, in any variety, and completely legalized to use, you, sir. You have all the various organic medicines, plant medicines, whatever they may be, to help an individual excavate through their primordial conditioning, their own unexcavated traumas and struggles and predictions and fears and dilemmas, and all of a sudden they're standing, feeling, emoting in the nakedness of a primordial rebirth to their own original heart of innocence, pre-conditioning, pre-losing their empathy. How did we lose our empathy? How did we lose our peaceful love of coexistence? How do we lose these? And I'm asking myself in this book, which wasn't a book at all, deep theatrical, cinematic, psychedelic heart literature, art, my radical art. Don't play it safe. I don't want anyone. I don't care whether you like me or not. Don't we ever want to get out of our own way and just scream at the finest level of dance and convulsion possible? How much more violence can we take? The frustration level, if we embody each other as family and sister and mother, the cliche goes, I would cry 1,000,000 tears plus some. But the dilemma of how in modern times, how can we remove from the collective genome here in this time frame of existence the proclivity of violence? That is, to me, the central question. I've said it so often, mindfulness is not enough. We don't have time to meditate ourselves out of the dilemma. All the monasteries, all the meditation centers in Burma primarily will be permanently closed to the world community, and vice versa. Those nuns and monks and lay people gone from our ability to meet them. A huge resource of Dhamma at stake. And so I asked myself, what could you do? What could be done? And yes, how to prevent a California genocide, a footnote that no one even thinks about. Barreling down the freeways, getting into LAX and SFO, flying here, the pandemic and bushfires and forest fires, and will I be able to go to Whole Foods? Do I wear a mask? No jab, no mask. Should we just socially distance? Is it possible to get COVID? How many variants will there be? And all the while, layers upon layers, to state the obvious, but so easily overcome through fear and denial, prejudice and pride and profit and pre-orientation to self, self, self. The land is soaked in the blood of our Indian brothers and sisters, and no one even utters their name anymore. There is no cemetery for them. There is no hymn to them. There is no prayer for them. And you think beneath that, and beneath that, and beneath that, and above that, and above that, and above that, the dilemma of suffering and of violence. Oh, I watched and read again A Clockwork Orange by Stanley Kubrick. Malcolm McDowell, the protagonist. He could have been Adolf Hitler. He could have been Ming Aung Hlaing in Burma. He could have been Pol Pot. He could have been Ted Bundy. He could have been even a president who wines and dines and by proxy orders massacres and genocides and murders and persecution. Malcolm McDowell, to me, was the embodiment of the sociopathic, sexual deviant, the violent, psychopathic, white supremacist, toxic, radically toxic, terrorizing, patriarchal, violent male god, totalitarian, a dictator, but an ordinary civilian brought up in a culture of violence that was normalized, and through conditioning and lack of education and nurturing, whatever the conditions are that we say give rise to these, oh my God, he's a serial killer, captured. Found delight in rape and murder and persecution. And they, if you remember in the book, in the film, he went into radical conversion therapy to excavate from the DNA of his own psychology, his own deviant psychology, the proclivity to violate, rape, and delight in that. They clamped his eyes wide open, kept him in his conversion chair, an anti-indoctrination chair. It could have been any president, any prime minister, any man and woman. Who were the men and women that ordered, that celebrated, that counted the money of Indian scalps killed in the name of civilization. Malcolm McDowell welcomed to the existence of a metaphor called violence. It's not a man or a woman. It's God. It's the devil in everyone. And he's forced to watch these images of extreme violence. And it's forced to listen to his favorite composer, Beethoven. And so it associated his most rapturous sense of psychological, emotional satisfaction and seeing these images of violence and then hypersexualized images to the point where he was now convulsing in the uncertainty of a sociopathic psychology. And the whole theory was in this film, A Clockwork Orange, in the book, to force him to confront deep proclivities of consciousness, not just societal consciousness, but genetic consciousness. And I would go even deeper to existential, the ecosystem of the pre-existential, whatever this is that we're embedded in. He did not ask to be a social deviant, a sexual psychopath. He did not ask to be Hitler. And the dilemma of violence and suffering. And I thought about this example of radical conversion therapy, and I added a number of things. I won't give away the punchline in my book, but it's my attempt to non-violently use everything that we know in advanced artificial intelligence, the purest and most radical forms of molecular biology within the psychedelic, with the power of heart and music, creativity, the alchemist in each of us, in me, the artist, the savant, the radical breaking through. Alan, you will be hated for what you wrote. But all I'm trying to do is remove suffering from consciousness. Creatively, artistically. But you can't say that. It's better for the world to become extinct than to pen those words so bluntly. California genocide, a Holocaust, Pol Pot, 2 million Cambodians, Burma the next killing fields in 1990. That girl that was shot in Mon Hua, my daughter. The hunting of critics of terrorism in Burma, the hunting of them, going into monasteries and homes, shooting where there's light, a demonic, satanic force. And oh my God, oh my God, how can we collectively as humans bond in an existential warrior militia and put our mind and resources together? We don't have time to wait to meditate ourselves out of the dilemma or just simply to pray. We need radical Red Sea parting on a collective global level. We need to understand, and I think that's what I went to here in this, is what is possible. That's the dilemma for me here. Yes, get rid of the terrorist group in Burma. Get rid of evil men and women who run based on money and profit. But, no more buts. Break your censorship code. Break your collusion to conformity. Break out in protest through radical creative activism. Go for the dream of a heightened world without violence, right? We don't want just one's own enlightenment. I don't say that's 2 days ago. Yes, take care of yourself. Make sure you're on the bank rather than in the rapids of a river. All the ways to get you to do the work to overcome your own interior suffering, your own collusion with suffering, your own collusion with violence. But I wonder today, with artificial intelligence, psychedelic therapy, meditation, creativity, imagination, looking through the periscope, the telescope of infinity, breaking out of the box of your own shame and fear and worry, really losing it on the tantra field of infinite possibility. What can we do to imagine ourselves creatively? And all of a sudden, it becomes necessary that every leader, politician, congresswoman, congressman, every priest and pope, everyone in the world of high order decision making, you must pass the test of men and women who are trusted artistically, psychotherapically, all the ways in which we empower intelligence, peace, and civility. We want to make sure you can walk your talk. When are we going to get to that point when a Clockwork Orange is mandatory on planet Earth? I say jump time. 120 years ago, it was sort of against the law here in California not to kill a Native American Indian, not to rape her. I hope I'm not being too graphic, but I'm not sure you can be graphic enough. We need to become, so repulsed, I think, biologically by violence, that when we feel the urge to violate, there's a mechanism in evolution, biological and psychological and existential, where it is so anathema to the biological existential system of inner being that it's like a bacterial infection, but worse. It's more like existential cholera or the existential anguish of dengue, existential dengue fever. That imagine that if we've gotten to the point where we had, I dare even say, some form of genetic enhancement that rather than, mandatory, decolonization of the planet through these potential vaccines, but it removed, minimized, attenuated, or completely disavowed or dissolved any proclivity in the human heart and mind for the prehistoric, ancient, obsolete compulsion to harm self or other, to violate, to commit an act of violence, to kill. I know this is really kind of like, has he gone off the edge? Too much acid, too much isolation, not enough sex, whatever. No, we are not the insane ones. Yes, I was a monk for a while. I've said this. But not just in the country of Myanmar or Burma. I went off to Sri Lanka for about a year and a half. I lived on an island called the Island Hermitage. This was in a bay just off the southern tip, near the southern tip of Sri Lanka. And the island was 5 acres in size. It was a monastery. And there was no running water. There was no food that we cooked. There was no electricity. And we were provided for by the generous support of lay women and men who lived nearby, but off the island. I think it was in the area of Dodandua in southern Sri Lanka. And it was a mystical, magical, and terrifying experience for me. I wanted to be so far away from civilization, so far away from violence. So I was accepted to stay on this island, and there's like 10 cottages, 10 monks. And the only prerequisites to stay alone, to abide by the precepts, to stay in silence. And there was something very profound and very heavenly about it. But as I relaxed more into living in nature, beyond my, how do I want to say this, beyond my beliefs, beyond my prejudices, my romanticizing of nature, the more I felt into this primordial, deep, ancient jungle on the island. Huge trees. They had these massive monitors. They call them cobras. They're like crocodiles or alligators. They're amphibians that live on the land and hang and then go into the water. They're everywhere. And the island was filled with rat and army ants, centipedes, scorpions, vipers. I mean, it was, as I relaxed more into life on the island, with the owls and birds and the bats and the cobras, the army ants, the vipers, it was a terrifying realization, combined with the disease-laden mosquitoes, water that could easily render you sick from contamination, the vulnerability that if we didn't receive food by people coming out on a boat, and you just witnessed life. This is just pure, this is the closest I've ever gotten to just pure natural life. And my realization was, which is not such a unique realization, you are born as a human into a context that if there isn't protection from the animal world, the insect world, and the bacterial world, you die, and you die fast, and you die harsh. I remember watching these big cobras, these big alligator-type creatures, so nifty. They could climb a tree and shake a branch. And these big birds that would migrate down from the Himalayas in India and come and land and give birth to their babies, they would shake them, and these baby birds that were quite large would fall to the ground, and these cobras then would eat them. But then it wasn't confined just to eating other species. An older cobra would become weakened, and all of a sudden the army ants would come out of these huge hives underground and just march, and you'd like watch them, like 10, 15, 20 army ants wide, 10 meters, 20 meters of them, and they would enter this 200-pound monitor's mouth, who was no longer able to move because it was aged, and they would eat this alligator-like creature from the inside out. And 2 days later, 3 days later, you would see nothing other than perfect white skeleton, and all of it was gone. And you would go like, oh my God, if I broke my leg or if I fell down, I am the cobra. I am the army ant. I am part of this samsaric, treacherous being born. I must face the dilemma of death by persecution of other life. And then there's this internal violence that we must come to terms with greed, fear. How many of us have been betrayed or abandoned? And look at all the things that are going down right now. All the little boys and girls in the world who don't have their mother and father or safety are weeping as our children right now on planet Earth. We're in a dukkha field, a violence field. Yes, curse me to the end of the talk. Why are you being so negative? I'm not being negative. I'm talking about how to overcome evil, violence, suffering, complicity with violence, non-violently. I wrote a book about that, Extinction, X-rated. Get it, see my take, see my art. And yet in Burma today, I'm wondering, I'm hearing, I'm listening, I'm partaking of. People are taking up violence to confront evil violence. They're talking of how to throw grenades into military trucks. They're talking about how to be trained and to interrupt and remove the epic evil morale of the former military in Burma. How to demoralize them, how to contaminate their water in Naypyidaw, how to contaminate their food supply. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And Greta is screaming at the United Nations 2 years hence on September 19th, 2019 coming up. I dare you take from me my dream and my family and my friends. People are suffering. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. And all you want to talk about, in my language, is money and profit and press releases. And you do nothing except masturbate to your need for money, power, and profit. Let's have another California genocide. And state-sanctioned rape and starvation and murder based upon the colonists just merely 121 years ago. Dr. Sasan Burma is screaming to the world, intervene to stop a genocide in Burma. I pleaded yesterday with the senior-most monks in Myanmar. Sitagu, Sayadaw, talk to Ming online. Take up intervention on a Dhamma level. I would throw so much LSD into the water supply of Naypyidaw and render the evil in those men and women there. Let them melt down. Why is that so radical to say? And yet mass murder is tolerated. We are so F-U-C-K-E-D-U-P. It's mind-boggling. Perversity is murder. Sanity is you put LSD in the water supply of the capital of Myanmar. That's not contaminating the water supply. That's the most radical, peaceful conversion therapy, a Clockwork Orange possible, and play their favorite army hymns while they trip. And those guns will fall to their sides, and those men and women right now, blinded by the obedience of evil, they would melt down and rip those uniforms off. It'd be a collective liberation from the evil of the obedience of indoctrination, indoctrination, indoctrination. I am heartbroken and equally what's new. In my famous Discourse of the Buddha, I'll come to a conclusion here and carry on tomorrow. The Tuvatakasuta, Tuva. Tuva. Quick. Radiant. So pregnant with the fertility of conception. Ignitable. The passion, the rapture, the radiance of a holiness, the resurrection, redemption, the Buddha touching the earth. I see you, Mara. I refuse to participate in any collusion or fear with your temptations and with your threats. Vanquished. And there is the radiance, they say, of an enlightened state. The Tuvatakasuta, the Buddha is talking to Deva consciousness. And he is outlining, as I understand it through my own teacher, Mahasi Sayadaw, talking about this famous discourse, this very obscure discourse attributed to the Buddha. 3 forms of seclusion. The seclusion that you have as I went to the island hermitage in Sri Lanka, away from civilization, a renunciation from the machinations of greed and fear and delusion. And all you see there, young monk, is the machinations of natural samsara, free of urbanization, free of digitalization. You get to see in a naked way and convert to the reality of what it means to be born into this world. And that was a gift for me to give myself that level of physical seclusion. The next level of seclusion, and I so praise my teachers for helping me to understand the power of the Satipatthana Vipassana Sutta, the power of mindful intelligence to control your own mind, your own psychology, your own emotional intelligence, your own spiritual intelligence, as Sayadaw U Pandita called it. You have the capacity to understand the components or the constituents of consciousness that allow you to become secluded from, no longer enthralled out of conditioning and habit, to embody or embed in negative energies, violent energies, fearful energies, terrifying energies. You're no longer able to commit through speech, thought, and action acts of violence. It said that the Buddha, the core motivation was to achieve ahimsa, harmlessness. Through the perception of violence, I want to achieve the ultimate nonviolent state, seclusion of and from kilesa, or mind states that lead to violence and suffering inside and outside. And the thing that really grabbed me deeply, really grabbed my heart and my soul, so to speak, in classical Dhamma was, I never heard anyone talk about it, the seclusion on a permanent basis of any proclivity to violate through greed, anger, and delusion. The complete, utter absence of violence within a context of randomness, of novelty, of crisis, and degrees of crisis, and degrees of complexity. We're born as a human, and although you may have seclusion and normal peace, and you may have a modicum of seclusion through Dhamma practice, still we're in a context. Randomness happens. Look at the good people in Burma. Monks and nuns are being raided and killed and raped and tortured. Boys and girls are being raped, killed, and tortured. They have Dhamma in their heart. And here, out of nowhere, like animals, army ants, the demonic military, like predators, come into the homes, the monasteries, the villages, the cities, the hotels, the schools, the hospitals, the cafes, and torture, demonize, kill, rape, and shoot. Why? How? I don't want to rely just simply on the knowledge of karma. Wow, wow, wow. We must collectively rise up, freedom fighters around the world, and find modern ways to re-enchant nonviolent democracy, and how to confront epic militias that killed the American native Indians in California and removed the population from 150,000 to 19,000 in 51 short years. That is a massive genocide sanctioned by the white colonist. Overlapping genocides. We need to act. And so this deep concept called nibbana, in Sanskrit nirvana, nibbana. When I use the word extinction X-rated, it's nibbana that I'm referring to, not just the potential extinction of life and nature on our planet. The Buddha was said to have said that nibbana is the only true extinction that's possible in a cosmos, in a samsara, where multiplicities of extinctions happen simultaneously. But the extinction of self-generated violence and unrecognized allegiance to states of mind that promote terrorism and violence externally through speech and action, that's the only true refuge. And he called it the third seclusion. And Mahasi Sayadaw, in reiterating this ancient, brilliant Tuvatakasuta, the three forms of seclusion, where do we hear the absolute absence of violence and suffering? Pause and end, and I'll carry on tomorrow. If there's a virtuous concept that I've heard in life, including some of the ones I just shared, and I don't have much of a hold on it, but it's compassion. Compassion and empathy. Call it just, for me, basic human caring for other. It's easy to care for some when there's an investment. She or he loves me, and my emotional reciprocity is I love her and him, often with unrecognized allegiance to behaviors, thoughts, and actions that live in these kind of protocols or these kind of agreements that if breached or broken, I no longer love you and feel compassion or empathy or love. But to be motivated by compassion, to embody in our own human way, as best as Dhammically possible in our lifetime, the three seclusions, that to me is the true mark of a revolutionary. But right here, the role of a leader, the role of a revolutionary, the role of a protester, the role of a caregiver of democracy, the role of one who cares for, as Aung San Suu Kyi has stated, cares for things larger than her or his own self-interest. Where one begins to see this inseparable connectivity embodied in the word in South Africa, Ubuntu, that I am who I am with you and through you. Your dignity and my dignity are intimately inseparable. Deep, intimate mutuality. To know that, to feel that, and to embody other as family, to me is the emergence from empathy to compassion. And you couple that with Dhamma action, revolutionary action, and in many ways you fight the adversary with the hope of redemption. And that's a very existential, razor-sharp edge. Do you harm? Do you demoralize? Do you kill in the name of the Dhamma? And that's where I'd like to end today and begin tomorrow and talk about empathy and compassion tomorrow. And the modernization I feel, for me personally, the modernization, the reinterpretation, the uncensored, non-dogmatic, heightened tuva, the immediacy of a deva virtue, the swordness of it, the razor-like swordness of it, of how can we collectively create cognitive, emotional, existential, civil disobedience, existential disobedience, existential rebellion. How can we create an existential revolution that interrupts the apparatus of evil in the most immediate, urgent way? That if I were alive in the late 1800s and I had the capacity, no, white man and woman, you must stop the genocide of the indigenous people, and to convince them on the spot, an instant paralysis of the proclivity. We're talking of biblical proportions, right? Buddha-like proportions. I need and I want to encourage you, to encourage me, to encourage you, to encourage our tribe. Let's think so far out of the box now. I tried that with my book, Extinction X-Rated, to think so far out of the box. Let's break out of all conformity. We don't care anymore if you like me. We don't care anymore if you still want to friend me. We don't care anymore if you want to write a review for my book or not. We don't care. We want to break the code of violence on the planet. Nothing could be more important than putting out the proclivity of the human mind to kill its name and to kill nature and call it freedom, democracy, and truth. That perversity must come out of the genome and immediately, right? Are you with me? It's a new form of revolution. Art, activism, theater, satire, psychedelic, ayahuasca, tantric, intimacy, love, radical, weaponized metta. That revolution is where I am and where I want to go. Come join me. And thank you for being in my life. Thank you for participating. And thank you for encouraging me to encourage you to break out of the four walls, break out of the box of dogma, orthodoxy, not only protest, to live and breathe the existential, psychological, psychedelic experience. You don't need the molecule alone, but to break the coma of predictable thought, speech, and action. We need to break our allegiance to the Bible, to the Tipitaka. It's time to become unglued. The world and the future of life is at stake. We don't want to be a dead planet and take our dogma into the ground. We don't want to be discovered by some alien creatures that come to Earth and go, what happened here? Oh, another dogma-ridden, fossil fuel-addicted, indoctrinated, drunk, profit-mongering species called Homo sapien, the idiot. We must preserve the sanctity of life and break out of the belief alone that the Buddha holds the truth. I know that's rad, or that meditation, or the next retreat, or the next online training, or if only I'm more mindful of tasting my food, break the coma of me on me. Radical, theatrical, artistic, psychedelic infused, intimately trans-erotic, crazy on the stage of infinity. Let's think out of the box. Because right now in Burma, I'll close here, right now in Burma, it's a war. And the boys and girls of Gen X and Gen Z, even the nuns and monks, I met them in the jungle in 1989 and 1890. The ABSDF. It's a whole new generation that are taking up cognitive war, physical war. They're going to confront Ma Sak, the evil terrorist group in Burma today, and they're going to be defeated. The boys and girls of Burma is going to win, but the land is going to be soaked in tears and blood and horror, and temples lost, and nuns killed and raped, and monks defrocked, and soldiers that go insane. The blood and the weapons. Don't let it happen. We must intervene collectively, psychically, spiritually. And I dare say, put soldiers on the ground in Burma immediately. And for the boys and girls in Burma, interrupt the comfort, the health, and the safety and the sleep of the terrorist group. Make them so uncomfortable that they dare not even drink the water or that they eat. Their cars break down. They are so demoralized that they cave in to their own moral turpitude, their own morally rotten leadership in Naypyidaw, and all of a sudden the inversion, the collapse of evil, and right on, we celebrate worldwide with a new version of revolution. Let us join that revolution and equally think beyond the box of Burma. The future of life is at stake. So from my heart to yours, if you have the courage, get my book, Extinction X-Rated. I'm here. It's my artistic song on how to end violence. From my heart to yours, thank you for tuning in. See you tomorrow.